who forgot why we're here. Going to talk about SDLC through the ages, unravel the why in Agile practices. So first off, so I was in a session once where someone showed books instead of a bio, and I thought that was a pretty neat idea, so I stole that idea. Here's several books that have influenced me that are related to this topic. You'll see that some of these are very old programming books. And that's because I've been in software development full-time for over 30 years, and I've been playing with computers for my entire life. Back here on the shelf behind me is the original Elf on a Shelf. Seth, if you would drop a link for anybody who's curious on the Cosmic Elf, that's what's sitting up there on the shelf behind me. So you'll notice that also a bunch of these books are about management and teamwork, and that's because our software development's always being done as a team. A lot of our Agile practices surround teamwork, and it's useful to have those skills no matter what your title is. Also, just want to say that the goal of this session is we're going to navigate through software development, end with some clarity on a clear path forward, lots of stories and opinions from me. I'm going to end with some action items I think everybody should implement. And I'm hoping that by the end of this, everyone is thinking, oof, that's not entirely Agile of me, is it? And that you'll find something to take away to say, we could always do a little bit better. So with that, I'm going to start with a little icebreaker, just to get to know everybody. If you could scan this QR code, or Seth, if you could drop in the chat a link to Menti, that will pull up for us. If people could give me a little thumbs up or anything as we're getting here. There we go. I'm seeing some thumbs. All right. So what's your role in your organization? I just want to know who I'm talking to, and to see if I can make sure to cater. No surprise to see a number of engineers. We've got an executive in the room. We'll try not to talk bad about them. Give another minute for answers. Looks like we've got just about a good mix here. All right, thank you. For anybody who's sitting on that separately in your phone, I'll leave it on a quote. So let's assume for a minute that everyone here's Agile. Everyone is using Scrum or Kanban or some form of that. Everyone has a daily stand-up because it's cornerstone of Agile, right? So if we assume all that, let's take another quick poll. I promise I'm not going to use too many of these. Do you stand during your stand-up? No. 5 no's. Oh, we got a yes. Overwhelmingly, no. Oh, got a few more yeses coming in late. That doesn't surprise me. That's the norm that I've seen. But it's called a stand-up. Most times I hear somebody tell me that they hate their stand-up. It's because it's long and it's boring and it's not what I would call a stand-up meeting. Stand-up's in the name. That's actually where it came from, that you would stand up in the stand-up meeting so that you didn't get comfortable. You didn't get so comfortable by sitting that you got long-winded. You didn't drag out the meeting. You were there to say your piece and go. It's not for presentations. It's not to talk about overall project status. Definitely not for planning a resolution. When we ask if somebody is blocked, that's just to know and find out what their next step should be and send them away, not to resolve it there. It's definitely not a staff meeting, which happens so often of, well, since I've got you all here, and I've done it myself, so I'm pointing fingers at everybody. stand-up's in the name. It's supposed to be fast. It's not supposed to impact your velocity. And if you're having all those other conversations, it's my experience that half of the team doesn't care about those other conversations, and you're really wasting their time. Honestly, they'd probably tell you they don't care what anybody else is working on. That was already set up in the grooming and planning meetings, and they don't see the need for the stand-up anyway. They won't complain about it as much, in my experience, if it's nice and short. They will care if they hear things that overlap with their work. If they hear somebody saying something that's going to block their work that they committed to for the sprint, or if they hear a blocker they can help resolve, and that's why everybody's there. That's what you're supposed to do in a stand-up, and then move on. Let's agree for a minute that we need computers, we need engineers, we need the stakeholders and the visionaries. They're the ones who feed us new work and something else to do. And we probably need somebody to organize all that work for us, whether we like it or not. Also, we could probably expect that, circumstances aside, people are well-intentioned. Everyone wants to succeed. What we're making is something good. Hopefully we all expect that, agree to that, and think that going into it. We also can probably expect that the visionaries want to see it. They want to see their vision come to life, and sponsors and stakeholders, they're interested in what's the price, what's this going to cost me, which all ends up coming down to everyone wants to know when. When is it going to be done? When will you show it to me? When? So let's talk for a minute about why software is so hard to manage. It's unique. No matter what we say, software is unique. We rarely do the same thing twice, even when we're recreating the same thing. I recently had a conversation with someone who was talking about recreating their app, and doesn't the code already exist? They should just reuse the code, they being the engineers, of course. They should just reuse the code. And of course, as we talked about it, they were changing technologies, they were changing platforms. There were other reasons they were touching this app in the first place. And as we talked about it, and as I was trying to dissuade from, no, they can't just reuse the code and move it, I equated it to recreating their childhood home. They have their childhood home, they lived in it in a different state, and they have such blissful memories. They want to recreate it and live in it now. But of course, they want all the modernized utilities and heating and cooling, electrical circuits, you name it. They want everything modernized. I said, would you have the construction crew go to the old house, rip it apart, figure out how everything was built, and take all the measurements, and then come back and recreate it exactly, maybe tweaking all those little parts? Or would you just have a architect take all the important dimensions, and then of course all the features that were important to you and part of your fond memories, and build new? And of course, most likely we would do the build new. No matter what we're doing, it's unique. Even when we're copying the competitors, we want to distinguish ourselves from them. So it's highly inventive. It also relies on alignment. We talk to each other. We talk through what it is that we're trying to do, how we're doing it, how does it work. Hopefully we understand each other to get that alignment. And then there's that notion that not all the ideas are final, because it's highly inventive, because we might be seeing things for the first time, because we didn't realize computers could do that. How many times have you heard that in the conversation? We have all these unique attributes about what it is that we're trying to do that don't make it exactly the same as building the houses in my subdivision. But we have tried to compare to how have other industries managed their projects? How do they do this? Taking a look through, construction and manufacturing industries have used a lot of CPM methods, critical path methods. They're identifying the critical path, the sequence of stages, minimum time needed for an operation, and that helps them put together the plan. And of course, all of these are just generalities, not the only things that are done. Scientific research would use PERT, program evaluation and review technique, and they would use 3 estimates, optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely, to calculate an expected duration for a project. Aerospace like to use EVM, the earned value method, They combine scope, schedule, resource measurements, and assess the project performance and progress along as they go. Event management, event planners, they like to use Gantt charts and plot out all that on a timeline. We've tried these things. Everybody who's been through this has tried these things. We've tried. I've got just a small sampling of different things that have been tried between lean programming and test-driven development, feature-driven development, Scrum, XP, Safe, Rad, you name it. We have tried lots of different things to pull this together, organize this, manage it, and put together a timeline. So I'm going to go back in history a little bit. And when I first started and dinosaurs roamed the planet and somehow we had a computer, we were taught to flowchart first. Why was that? If you ever read about Bill Gates and some of his quotes, he talks about how expensive it was to use a computer terminal along the lines of $40 an hour. We did not sit down at the computer as much. And that certainly wasn't where we started. We would flowchart first, and that would lead to learning to play computer. So we would think about what the computer is going to do, how the computer is going to do this. We would actually work it through in our heads before we sat down at that terminal at $40 an hour to get that going. Not to mention the build and compile times, even in the 90s, were so slow that our brains were faster than the computer worked half the time. Software deployment took months. And to be clear, by deployments, I'm talking about getting it to all the servers, all the remote locations, all your customers, whatever deployment and installation meant in your world. As an example, in the early 90s, when I got my first big job, I was working at a leader in the retail industry you might have heard of called Kmart. And we had all kinds of high-tech relays and all sorts of pre-internet infrastructure, which was really cool there at the headquarters. We had satellite dishes to send out and transmit to all the stores. We had all these things that most of the other organizations that were around me didn't have. Because of all that, we would sneakernet around a whole lot less than the other orgs. And for anybody who doesn't know what sneakernet is, we used to just carry around the media from machine to machine by foot, whether that was on a floppy, USB, CD, whatever it was. And since we were doing it on foot, sneakernet. So Kmart did that a whole lot less. They had all this fancy technology, satellite dishes to communicate to the stores, everything else. And a rollout for a new version of our application would take something along the lines of 3 months to get out to all the stores. Hot fix would not have had the same meaning that you think of today. Linear thinking was the norm. Linear thinking obviously leads to waterfall. You finish one thing before you start the other. And at its cornerstones, waterfall was sequential with minimal iterations and heavy document driven. It followed a sequential step-by-step approach where each phase has to be completed before you move on to the next. Phases like requirements and design, implementation, testing, deployment, maintenance, those were all done very linear because that was the norm. And minimal iterations was the goal because rework was bad. So this came from studies coming out from the 80s about the cost of software development. It created emphasis on quality management, which was a birth of concepts like TQM, total quality management, and CMM, capability maturity model. These were emphasizing the importance of identifying and fixing defects as early as possible in the development process to improve the quality. We've heard that, right? We still cite those same exact statistics now. We still reference them and go back to them as a matter of we need to avoid the defects early. Rework is bad. But in that linear thinking world, and a waterfall process that came from it, that just raised the bar on each phase to say that everything you did needed to be perfect before it was handed off and moved to the next phase because rework was bad. So it created all kinds of contentions that it was so slow and nobody could ever change their mind and perfect was the enemy of good. Documentation was key, and that documentation lived on paper, but that was how you could know and prove in the future that you did your entire process fully and completely. Everybody signed off on it, everybody agreed, and now we're changing our minds. Unit testing was done manually by programmers. You know, part of this is just an obvious fact of the tooling wasn't available. So, for example, JUnit was created by Kent Beck and Eric Gamma in '97. But besides that, the mentality wasn't there either. A number of things, from how fast the computers were working to why would I have the computers write more code to prove that their code works? That's just asking them for the same answer. Yet we asked them for the same answer to manually test. That was the fun fallacy there. And then code reviews were a lengthy, time-consuming process. So we had Fagan inspections. Thank you, Michael Fagan. I should have had a link handy for this to drop into chat. Actually, I think I do. Thank you, Michael Fagan. The whole process was very waterfall, very methodical, very structured. You had roles for every attendee, a minimum number of attendees that could participate, and they each had a role, and we had process phases of preparation for this. The actual code inspection itself, huddled inside of conference rooms with printouts of it, going line by line, going back to playing computer, going line by line through it, figuring out whether or not we had anything wrong, and then, of course, rework phases. It was long and arduous, and of course had a lot of documentation trail for audits and recording. You feel the theme. So what have we done about it? Why are we doing this? Well, let's stop for a minute. I'm going to see if you guys are awake. Go back to the poll. Sorry. Here we go. On an average, how much time do you spend on your code reviews? This is not how much you spend a week. This is on a single code review. So far we're homing in at 30 minutes or less. So far different from the hours that we put in back in that waterfall era. So far, I see somebody asks, is PR a code review? Yes. You can count the PR as a code review. So different than what we used to do, where we spent days on this, literally, times a great number of people. Such a change from then to now. But then that makes me question, if we're skimming through it so quickly, are we getting enough of the value out of it? Let's talk for a minute about what we started to do to get away from this world. The Agile Manifesto. In February 2001, 17 different people from the programming community got together. These were like-minded but very different-minded. These were people who were keen on extreme programming, Scrum, feature-driven development, pragmatic programming, lots of things you've seen book titles for, maybe read the books about. All of them have a similar theme, but they're all a little bit different. 17 of these people got together in February 2001 and created what's called the Agile Software Development Manifesto. Just for reference, to compare out those 17 people and how hard that must be to get them to agree. For reference, 5 people are credited for the Declaration of Independence. A 5-member committee drafted the US Constitution. Somehow these 17 people came to 4 values, or the 4 pillars of the Agile Manifesto. We're just going to blast through these real quick. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This underscores the importance of people and their interactions in the software development. That Agile methodologies should prioritize effective communication and collaborating with each other. Why? Because more often than not, people had been writing process documents about which tools to use and exactly how to use them to throw your results over the wall and move on. This was to try to say that the tools are irrelevant, the exact how-to process is irrelevant. Work together to get to your goals. Which leads to number two, taking working software over comprehensive documentation. So they even said, while documentation is essential, the primary focus should be on delivering functional software. That this should be what Agile values, that it values working solutions and customer satisfaction over extensive documentation that may not even contribute to the end product. So, pet peeve of mine, this does not say no documentation. It always irritates me when people say something like, we don't create documentation because we're Agile, or because that would be waterfall. The key word in this sentence that they came up with was comprehensive documentation. And they even have a principle that describes that even better later. Third pillar was customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So again, Agile's encouraging that communication, active involvement, collaboration with the customers throughout the development process, not to strictly adhere to your contract saying this is what you're going to do, but to value the feedback in an ongoing way from the customers and adapt to changing requirements. So that's the whole point here, is to be nimble, agile, adaptive, use whatever word you like. This isn't to say I did exactly what you asked for, but to collaborate as to creating what they really want. And last pillar, responding to change over following a plan. So again, agile, change, adapting. Agile embraces change and acknowledges that the requirements may evolve over time. That's the point. The waterfall method figured out all the requirements for months. And then by the time anything was done, the world had changed and the industry had changed and the competitors that were already further ahead. This is to acknowledge that those requirements are going to evolve over time and that we need to respond to the change. We need to adapt to new information and not be so vehemently sticking to a predetermined plan. In the manifesto, they actually have these written out as long lines, not the way I've got them drawn on these slides, but they've got them as full sentences. And they say outright, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So they're not saying not to have processes and tools. They're not saying not to follow a plan, but to value the other side of this equation a little bit more. All right, just to see who's awake, do another quick survey here. Have you read the manifesto before? This will help me pace myself on how fast or slow I should blast through the next slides, or whether I've already put everybody to sleep because I can't see you. This is amazing. Look at all these yeses. All right, then we'll go through them a little bit faster and I'll just tell more stories. So I've got a few of the 12 principles. I suggest, and we have a link for the actual manifesto for the people who haven't read it or heard it. Seth, if you could paste the official link. That is the actual. I went to other sources while I was putting the slides together and found a number of adapted wordings. So I suggest going there to read the actuals. We're not going to deep dive into all 12 of them. I'm particularly going to skip these that are listed here. Some of these are more around culture and interrelationships and things that engineers don't always have enough say on. These are things that we find ourselves as the tail trying to wag the dog. For the leaders that are on the call, these are important and are certainly a reason why they're a part of the principles. But I'm going to blaze over those real quick. Jump into principle number 1. Our highest priority is satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So this is stark contrast to waterfalls. Ship it when it's done and perfect. So satisfy the customer requires it's good and usable, and it says valuable software. But how many times have we been on a team where we called ourselves Agile, and then we're holding the release up and we're waiting for this new change that's just been introduced, and somebody is asserting that it's critical and we have to make this change, and we've never even heard this is really a change. We've all seen that. I'm not going to go to a poll for that. I know that that's happened, but this isn't just a point towards decision makers. How many times have engineers actually robbed the decision maker of being able to make this decision because they didn't merge and deliver their changes and show how it currently was, because they just wanted to get one more thing in and then wanted to get one more thing in, and there was days where there were no demos. Keep satisfying the customer and have early and continuous delivery. Just to put another story to this, well, I used to host a lot of go, no go meetings. You might call them change management meetings or other similar things. And when we would have these blockers come up, one of my favorite questions that I would go to very consistently was asking point blank, is this new version of the application better than the current version? As soon as they said yes, now they had to defend why it wasn't getting shipped, why it wasn't getting released, and why we weren't moving forward. If it was better then why wouldn't we be? A few years ago, well, more than a few, I had an engineer. He was hard at work on a feature. We all understood it so well. He slaved away on it. He struggled through some parts of it. He paired up with people to get through those parts, got it through QA, showed me a couple demos. We were all loving it. And at the end of the month, the sponsor for that feature called me up and told me we needed to scrap it. And of course, my heart sunk. And he told me very honestly, you delivered exactly what I asked for, but not what I needed. I was so disappointed in all that process, in all of that joy that we had internally as a team. We never once had had demoed to them during that development. And he was an internal client. Got to keep that high priority. I definitely made my mistakes there. Principle number 2, welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. So again, this is so far from the old belief of minimal iterations. Let's be honest. Nobody's going to point to this principle and welcome a late change that's a total rewrite and a total re-architecture of what we've had. That's hard to swallow and hard to welcome. I don't expect that this means that, and I would only rewind one slide to say so. Early and continuous delivery of valuable software should be a guardrail that radical changes wouldn't be the norm. So we should be welcoming normal changes that are for the betterment of what we're building. That's what they're saying, the customer's competitive advantage. We've all made mistakes. We've all thought and agreed beforehand that something made sense, looked right, sounded right, and then pushed out a change and had it fail. We've all made those mistakes. We've all had to do the large rework, but that shouldn't be the norm. And nobody should be saying that that happened without also acknowledging the mistake of it. Principle number 3, deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference to short time scale. Pardon me. Around the end of the 90s, I worked at a warehouse that we automated. Big bang release. We took an old walk around warehouse that everybody went in shopping carts and filled the orders and sent them through shipping, turned that into a fully automated, rival what you see on the videos from Amazon today, a fully automated warehouse, conveyor belts, automated picking lines, you name it. Big bang. Over a weekend, flipped the warehouse upside down, Worked the whole weekend. People installed all the conveyors and tracking and everything else, flipped this upside down, flipped the switch on all of our software, and marveled at our genius, only to nearly bankrupt the company with our defects. We didn't do a slow rollout. We didn't try and make sure that we didn't upgrade a single line of the warehouse and make sure that our software worked and actually met the requirements besides all the tests and everything we invented in our head. We didn't get that slow real world test. Big bang and big failure, lots of long hours. It was certainly a mistake on our part. XP has a practice and talks about how rarely Big Bang cutover works. I can attest to that. Delivering the working software frequently, but also thinking about how to do small slices and slow rolls, I find is incredibly important. I also know that this gets really tricky to navigate, and I've had engineers pointing to this rule with the reason why my brand new feature should be live today. Business and marketing wants to do a launch event, and of course, business and marketing wins on the launch event. They're going to win on the launch date. But I'm going to also say what happens with the software is key. I've worked in a number of environments and have done a number of different practices in there. And I'm going to point back to XP's corollary practice, a single code base, and say that that's key. That's key. Not only should you be delivering frequently, but it's got to be from one code base. So if you have things that are finished and are developed, but aren't turned on and live yet for marketing reasons, other business reasons, they're still inherently a part of that code. You're not maintaining things in parallel or triple lines or worse, and trying to keep everything in sync. I would still say all that's key. I've been down those roads, made those mistakes too. Moving on to number 4, trying to go through these faster. Principle number 4, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. XP's got a practice called whole team, and I do love for people that haven't already read the book, or people who don't remember, the book Extreme Programming Explained, chapter 10 of it has an entire chapter dedicated to what the whole XP team look like. It talks about the testers, designers, engineers, PMs, executives, users, even human resources. It talks about how everybody's playing a role in the software, in the development, in the process. It talks through all of that. Back in my waterfall days, I saw those business people once a quarter. And usually it was to review what they didn't like about what we last released, and to pontificate on what we were going to do later that somebody was going to spend 3 months designing all the requirements for and gathering all of that. Working together to help get through all that, key to getting that quick turnaround, that quick feedback loop. I'm jumping ahead to 7. Working software is a primary measure of progress. How simple is this, right? This is the sort of thing that memes are built on. You had one job. But seriously though, I've heard the same sort of thing for other jobs. For example, I've heard it said of sales many different times. Quotes like, "It's not a sale until the money's in the bank." But then I'll also call out that this says working software. And so correlating it back to sales, it's not just about closing the deal. Aaron Ross once said, customers don't care at all whether you close the deal or not. They care about improving their business. So the point here, I would say, is that in the end, there aren't awards for lines of code written, number of stories completed, number of story points done, number of features delivered, those sorts of things. That's not the key. The key is, does the software work? I see there's a question, where should this working software exist? In the hands of users in prod? I love this question. This is a great question. I think I'll probably end up touching on this again later, but I'm happy to hit it now. I think this is a great question, and the answer is the staple of it depends. So, in my opinion, it starts with your demo. This should be working in your demo at the end of the sprint in those other environments that you publish to. That's where it has to start. That you should have at the end of your sprint that is working, that is demoable and working and can be seen. I say that because not everybody, assuming everybody's got sprints, not everybody's sprints align with their releases. Not everybody releases to production as soon. But in order for you to get the feedback from the rest of the people, from the business people that we're working together with, from stakeholders, from anybody else who might see this, it's got to start there and keep working its way out. The rest of it is all dependent on what your release cycle looks like and how often you're pushing. I hope that helped answer. Principle number 8. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. I almost didn't put this in and skipped it with the other slides, but I thought that this was still really important to cover and to dive into for a minute what this is talking about. This is talking about finding a balance between delivering valuable software iteratively and maintaining a sustainable pace. It recognizes consistent progress and quality are more achievable when everything is balanced and that you don't have unsustainable practices. I've seen this violated in 2 different ways that I'll often ask when I'm interviewing a leader who tells me they want a better agile practice. My 2 questions are, when was your last death march? Death march being forced overtime and that crunch mode to get this release out the door and hitting that date. Number 2, how much capacity do you plan for technical debt and other maintenance work? Those are the gotchas and the signs that this isn't a balanced and sustainable process. Last principle I'm going to jump into, principle number 12. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. That says in one word, retrospectives. If going back again to the XP book, they've got a corollary principle called root cause analysis. It's focused on defects, but it's very directed at learning, not placing blame. This principle is about regular retrospectives to do it better, to not place the game and to learn how to do it better. I've heard the groans. I didn't hear them in this call, but I've heard the groans many times before. I've been in those quiet rooms where nobody's talking, nobody voices the troubles, nothing's getting solved, and then everybody chats later about, what went wrong, and whose fault it is, and all those other problems. I've also been in the really noisy rooms that aired all the problems and created 0 action items. It was just a complaint session. It was just venting. These are all broken processes. I run a nonprofit in my free time, and we recently completed a huge fundraiser. 48 hours later, we had a retrospective. The best part of it was a non-engineer was the one who started the retrospective meeting and called for it. I loved that. I was going to do the same and he beat me to it. We all learned lessons. We all had things that went poorly, things that we should do differently, things that we needed to learn from this and talk about. You're not on a perfect team and you're not a perfect human being. There's things we could be doing better, and this is the meeting to get that aired. All that said, we never answered this, did we? Everyone wants to know when. How is this going to feed into that? Well, before I get any deeper, you ever gone to a busy restaurant with a full waiting room and you've gone to the host station and asked, how long's the wait? Imagine you do that tonight for dinner. And the response you get is, how could I possibly tell you that? As they point to the fire marshal sign on the wall, they say, we have a seating capacity of 172 people. They point down to their desk and say, we have 50 tables. And they point to the menu and say, we've got over 60 different offerings on our menus, and some of them take longer to cook. And then on top of that, some people actually sit at their table and talk after they're done eating. There's no way I could predict your wait time. Could you imagine? But when they do the math in their head, rough math of averages, where they're like, they don't say this out loud, but table seems to leave, get bussed, seated about every 5 minutes. And there's 5 groups ahead of you on the list. So you're 20 to 30-minute wait. You're pretty happy, right? Now, obviously, you're not going to time them. Most people aren't going to time them to the minute. You expect it to be in the right range, but you wanted that answer to have that idea of, is it worth the wait, or should I go find something else and go to plan B? Everybody wants that. Stakeholders want that on their projects. Everybody wants it. That's cadence. I'm talking about doing that rough math, those rough averages, saying, okay, I've seen the tables go about every 5 minutes, 5 groups ahead of you. That rough math that they're working off of is cadence. I don't care if you're counting story points, features delivered, magical unicorn shoes, whatever it is, so long as you're not counting 40 hours a week times X number of people equals Y amount of work completed, and that's how much work we get done. You need to have some stabilizing factor that helps you get to big estimates and trends. Without that cadence and without it established and without it validated, you're talking swag, you're talking silly guesses. And what does silly guesses get us? All kinds of estimates. I know the slide's busy, but it's only got a few key points to it. We should start by getting better at doing estimates on a small scale. So many of the Agile practices talk about small scale. Being accountable to what you're going to do in a sprint, what you're going to do in a week, what you're going to do in a day. Having smaller stories is going to equate to smaller risk. Saying we're all bad at estimating, it's a reality, but it's not an excuse. Be better at it by estimating smaller things and get 4 out of 5 stories done this week instead of 0 or almost 1 out of 1 done. And be thoughtful in your retrospectives about what influenced your ability to hit what you committed to. If you can do that on a daily basis, you can string that together on a weekly basis, you can do that more and scale that out. But if you can't do it well at a small scale, it's never going to scale out. My advice number 2 on estimates and keeping estimates is to be mindful about changes from what you committed to. Create new stories for new changes. This is one of the most frequent things I've heard about why something slipped. It changed. Good acceptance criteria is going to help you to see when this is a new change. Regardless if you had the acceptance criteria, you know if that's what you plan to do or not what you plan to do. Be mindful about those changes, but also be mindful of your mistakes in this, regardless of what your role is. This is a learning opportunity to not make the same kind of mistake again. So if it was your job to fill in better acceptance criteria, how could you have improved that? If it was your job to interpret that, how could you have validated your assumptions? Speaking of assumptions, point number 3, because everybody always wants to know when, and they want to know when on big things, you should keep in mind that estimating a feature or an epic or whatever you call your mega release is very different from estimating a task. The precision isn't the same. For everybody who's had the math classes that's been taught, the precision of the input values should be considered, and the result should not be reported with more significant figures than the least precise input. What has that got to do with this? This is so true about the swags for your major things. You are trying to avoid a waterfall process. You are trying to avoid knowing everything about everything before you do anything, and you're guessing big numbers. So if you're estimating something in weeks, then the only details you need to focus on and derive from would be ones that matter if they change the number of weeks. This is something we reinforce regularly at Integral, pointing back to that. More so, we talk about documenting our assumptions for those estimates. So we practice this frequently, where if there's a huge variance in an estimate, I don't know, this could take anywhere from 4 weeks to 27 weeks. That's huge. What's causing that? We talk about the risk and if that risk is expected to be true or not expected to be true. If it's not even expected to be true, we remove it from the estimate, but we document it as an assumption that this isn't going to be present, that this isn't a part of the estimate and won't be something that's considered. If it comes up, that's a change. I'm saying this for the PMs, any sponsor, stakeholder, executives. Reasonable timing and slack need to be present in timelines that come from these estimates. This is directly related to eighth principle of the Agile Manifesto, and that manifesto specifically names the sponsors. So when we're talking about the timelines that come from these estimates, those need to be handled in that sort of a way. But engineers, we need to own our estimates and how we're addressing them. So what do we do with all this? I've got a number of to-dos for everybody who's doing them all. Great, happy for you. If you've got all of these nailed down, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how great your process is. Let me talk about number one. Make sure your backlog is small, vertically sliced stories and demo often. Small, vertically sliced stories is one of the things I see done the least often. So vertically sliced is that it covers everything. Whenever I hear, well, we're doing the back end story, we're doing the front end story. How are you demoing it? Well, I can't demo the back end story because it's just a back end. Well, that's garbage. That's not what we should be doing. We should be doing vertically thin sliced stories that can be demoed. Even if you really were doing just a back end, because I've worked on services that are just API calls. I've worked on those. You're testing them. You must have some sort of a test harness and a proof that the actual API endpoint is working. You have something that can be demoed. So make sure that you are taking thin slices and demoing it often. You'll get the feedback quicker. Point number two, get a cadence. Use story points. This is how you know what a normal volume or velocity looks like. How many are getting done in what cycle? Don't use hours, use points. Don't tell me that one story point equals 2 hours. You're using hours. The best analogy I ever heard for this was comparing story points to races and saying, with races, we've got 5Ks, we've got 10Ks, we've got lots of distances. We know that a 10K is roughly twice as big, twice as long as the 5K. But we also know that I don't run a 5K as fast as you run a 5K. And so we will have a different velocity. But as far as size and complexity goes, we have a standard. Number three, analyze that cadence that we just got from number two. Analyze the cadence. Review your customer value. That's one of our goals. And be accountable to a burn down if you're using burn downs and doing sprints. You need to know that you're hitting the mark. And that mark isn't just getting stories completed. Working software is our primary measure. It's not our only measure. Be accountable to your burn down and know whether or not you are achieving your goals. If you're not, number four, have an honest retrospective that results in assigned action items. If there's no action items and they're not assigned, you're just venting. If you didn't hit your expectations, there's reasons. There's reasons why, and you should start asking the 5 whys. Because when you ask why 5 times, you start to get into the actual root cause and you start to think about what can I change to make this better. And then number 5, if you're using sprints, align your sprint length. I dropped off this sentence on purpose because you should align this to whatever it is that you're actually releasing. This goes back to the question that got asked earlier. Where are you releasing and how often are you releasing isn't going to be the same for everybody. And some people will release very regularly, weekly or every 2 weeks to QA, and not release to production for an entire quarter. I'm not going to get into all of that, but when you are doing your releases, you're doing a release, no matter who it is that's seeing it, no matter who that customer is that's seeing it, you have that. If you are releasing every week and your sprints are 2 week long, you've got a misalignment here. And you might find that that misalignment is part of why your cadence feels weird and why your burn down's looking weird, because you have this misalignment. So I always strongly suggest, don't tell me you're using 2 week sprints because everybody does 2 week sprints. How often are you releasing? See, I've got a couple things here in the comments. Seth, I'll leave it to you if we should come back to those. I'm almost done. Number 6, TDD. Good unit tests not only keep your code stable, but they reduce knowledge transfer and the need for as much paper documentation. The tests become the documentation of the what's this supposed to do? How's this supposed to work? It lets somebody else jump in and they make a code change and they know if they broke it or not. 7, pair more often. If you're already pairing, okay. If you're pairing all day, great. Are you pairing well? That might be another question. If you're not pairing at all, just do a little. Eliminate the need for knowledge transfer sessions, long peer reviews, and reducing rework from the pull requests and the code reviews. All of these start to tie together. If you're pairing, you don't have the knowledge silos, but you also have all that context of the, I've already been reviewing your code and understand your code as we've been going along. You're not as likely to get a rework or anything else coming from it because we've been working together through this. Number 8, I didn't use the Navy's definition. Keep it short and simple. Simplicity, one of the manifestos. Simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. XP talks about what's the simplest thing that could possibly work. Not the simplest thing that will fail. Not the simplest thing you could do. The simplest thing that could possibly work. Number 9, stop selling waterfall. I guarantee you're not going to sell anybody on sponsoring a technical debt item that stops all the development for 3+ months. I worked in that world where we kept trying to sell that. It was already there before, and when I got the job, they told me that this had been on their backlog and wish list for over a year already. Before I was on the team. We were never going to get that kind of a time, but we stopped adding to our legacy monolith by making sure that new features didn't recreate and add to the problem. New features had microservices done on the new architecture. We didn't create more tech debt. And when we were doing something that was a major change to an existing one, we stopped and thought for a minute, can we split this off? Is this a good time? Let's not tackle all the tech debt. That's never going to get sponsored. Number 10, improve. Simply put, increase your velocity. Whether that's better processes, better CI/CD tooling, better team harmony, better written stories, implementing AI, whatever that is. There's room for improvement. That should come out of your retrospectives. And if I was talking to mostly management and leaders, I'd say to make sure you have the right people. The items that I skimmed over were surrounding culture and interrelations. And like I said, it's hard for the tail to wag that dog, but leaders, you need to build that environment. And anyone who says, I've done all that, Schreiber, why am I even in this? That was a waste of time. If you did that all, I suggest rereading the XP Explained book. Every time I read that, I get new and better clarity and insight every single time. And if your environment is impossible, you've tried doing this, you've read the books, you came to this webinar looking for the magic answer, and I didn't give it to you, I'd speculate there's some fundamental problems, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's broken. As an example, a team that's being impacted by changing priorities and a lot of escalation work, probably doesn't work well with sprints or even Scrum, but could still be very agile and might benefit from something else like a Kanban principle. There's always room, and I'm happy to chat and consult on that. With that, you have questions?
Yeah, there's a few questions in the webinar chat.
All right. Also, I've got a QR code here for a survey. Take my survey. I'd like to know how I can improve. And I will select one random winner to get a $25 Amazon gift card. Let's see. You touch on XP principle that doesn't get talked about enough. Self-similarity. This is how we scale, and you touch on here with estimates. Good at estimating small things, and you get better on the aggregate. That's the big things. That's right. I agree. Can you explain more about what story points are if they're not pair hours or whatever? Why does it matter so much to us to use points instead of time estimates? So great question. Great question. I'm only going to touch on this in the time that we have, but this is to be able to say that everybody's not equal. If we were trying to say how fast is somebody going to run a 5K, and all we had was collegiate level runners who were competitive, we'd have a very narrow window of that. If we were talking about your publicly open 5K, we have a very wide window. I have a friend's son who runs them at a third of my pace. There's a very wide window. We won't all write code the same. We won't all navigate through them the same. More importantly, we shouldn't make ourselves do that. And how do we know when somebody's improved? So if I bring in junior level engineers, they're not going to write at the same speed as the senior level engineers. And that's okay. But when they get faster, how will I know that? How will I see that? How will I measure that? Should see that in the story points. They're going to start running the 5Ks slower, but they're going to get better and faster with them. The team should still have that. Change isn't overnight, and so that team velocity should still be roughly the same. If they get 20 story points out a week on average, they're going to get 20 story points out a week. And as those juniors get faster, that velocity is going to go up. Talk about the difference between waterfall big upfront planning versus a discovery. Oof. So waterfall had to know everything about everything before you did anything. Because no changes, right? Change was bad. Discovery is about getting to that direction. Discovery is about, okay, we talked about 20 different things. Which one are we going to start with? What would we do with that? How are we going to get moving? What could this look like? It is not answering all the questions. You're still going to have spikes that research answers. You're still going to have all those other processes. I hope that helped. Happy to answer more offline. What is this talk of microservices? I thought I was extending the virtues of a single code base. I'm not sure I understood the question. Happy to take it offline. You can email me. I know we're also at time. Thanks to everybody for attending. Seth, do we have anything else outstanding I missed?
No, I think we can wrap it there. If Nate, if you want to expand on your question, feel free to in the chat, or I can allow you to talk and we can go over that question. I think he's referring to earlier, you talked about a single code base and how it was important for like that you were deploying one thing or something like that. I can't quite remember, but there was mention of a single code base. Similar question about whether that meant it was necessarily a monolith.
Let's see. So maybe I can answer this in 2 sentences, and otherwise, Nate, feel free to reach out to me offline. Maybe I can answer this in 2 sentences. Single code base, I'm talking about how we're branching and how many of those branches are going to how many different environments and what that mess might look like, right? So that for any particular compiled deliverable. We might have different versions of it where we have 3 QA servers and only one production environment, and we go through this jumbled mess of merging that. That's what we want to get away from with a single code base. The monolith, we can absolutely break that up into microservices and individual and separately deployed components that also makes it easier for us to deploy this little piece, because that's the only piece that changed, and that's all that we need to deploy, and not the entire code base and not the entire feature and functionality. Looks like that did help. Thank you. Good question.